Don't panic, it's a trap. Maid's daughter slips a note. Billionaire realizes she saved his life. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's jump into today's story. At a luxurious mansion perched high above the city, life seemed perfect for billionaire Charles Wyndham. His company was thriving, his wealth ever-expanding, and his reputation spotless. But there was one thing that he hadn't accounted for, an unseen danger that lurked right beneath his nose. It was just another ordinary afternoon when Charles decided to host a private meeting with his board members and associates in the grand dining room of his mansion. The room was filled with rich, polished wood and expensive artwork, the kind of setting that oozed authority and success. Charles sat at the head of the table, his usual confident demeanor in full force. His guests, all highly successful individuals, talked amongst themselves, discussing their latest projects and deals. Among the staff was Mary, a quiet, hard-working woman who had worked for Charles for over a decade. Mary was a housekeeper, and though she had been employed in the mansion for many years, her presence was largely ignored by the power players in the room. She was there only to serve, and serve she did, moving silently in the background, clearing dishes and refreshing drinks. But it wasn't long before something unusual happened, something that would change everything. As the meeting continued, one of the most influential figures in the room, a well-known investor, made a statement that caught everyone's attention. "Charles, you do realize the latest merger is a trap, right?" The words hung in the air, causing an uncomfortable silence to fall over the table. Charles, surprised by the bluntness of the comment, turned his attention to the investor. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to maintain his composure. But before the investor could respond, there was a slight rustling sound from the corner of the room. It was Mary's daughter, Sarah, who had just entered with a tray of fresh coffee. No one noticed her at first, but as she passed the table, she dropped a small piece of paper near Charles's seat. Charles, still focused on the conversation, didn't notice at first. But when Sarah quietly returned to the kitchen, a sense of unease filled the room. Charles glanced down and saw the note. With a raised brow, he picked it up and read the words, "Don't panic, it's a trap." He froze. His mind raced. What was this all about? Sarah had been working here for years, but this sudden, cryptic message seemed out of place. He couldn't help but wonder, what was she trying to warn him about? The note seemed innocuous, but the look on Sarah's face when she handed it to him, quiet, almost fearful, told him there was more to this than he realized. As the meeting continued, Charles couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but he couldn't quite see the picture yet. For the first time in years, the mighty billionaire felt a small, creeping sense of doubt. Could it be that someone was out to trick him? To manipulate him? The tension in the room grew as he sat silently, the note in his hands, as the meeting carried on without him. The answer to his questions, he knew, was just around the corner. And the truth, once revealed, would change everything. As Charles sat at the table, his fingers tightened around the note, the cryptic message weighing heavily on his mind. The conversation continued, but he was no longer part of it. His attention was fixed on the words, "Don't panic, it's a trap." What kind of trap? Who was behind this? And why would Sarah, the housekeeper's daughter, be the one to warn him? The thought gnawed at him, but he kept his composure, determined not to reveal his concern. He glanced around the room, still trying to piece together the situation. The investors around him were speaking in hushed tones, their words filled with uncertainty about the merger that was supposed to secure his company's future. Yet, in the back of his mind, something didn't sit right. Sarah's note couldn't be a coincidence. He decided to take a brief break from the meeting. Standing up, he excused himself and stepped out of the dining room, the weight of the note still pressing on his chest. He found himself walking down the grand hallway of the mansion, the marble floors gleaming under the soft light. He needed to speak with Sarah to understand why she had written the note and what she had seen. His mind raced as he approached the kitchen, where he knew she would be. As he entered, he found Sarah standing by the counter, her hands busy with cleaning dishes. She didn't see him at first, so he took a deep breath before speaking. "Sarah, I need to talk to you," Charles said, his voice calm but laced with urgency. Sarah stiffened, startled by his presence. She slowly turned to face him, her eyes wide with fear, as though she knew exactly what was coming. "Mr. Wyndham, she stammered, but he raised a hand to silence her. "I saw the note you gave me. What's going on? What did you mean by it's a trap?" Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting nervously around the kitchen. She seemed unsure of how much she could reveal, but Charles was insistent. "You can trust me, Sarah. I need to know. My company, everything is on the line." After a long pause, Sarah finally spoke. "It's about the deal, sir. I overheard some things. I shouldn't have, but I did." "The merger you're about to sign? It's not what it seems. There are people planning to manipulate you, to get you to sign over everything." Charles felt a chill run down his spine. The walls of the mansion suddenly seemed much closer, and the floor beneath him felt a little less solid. He had suspected something was off, but hearing Sarah's words confirmed his worst fears. "Who?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah shook her head. "I don't know exactly who, but I know they're in the room with you. They've been setting everything up for months. They've used your trust, your need to expand, to push this deal through." Charles felt his stomach tighten. The investors, the deal, everything was starting to look like a carefully crafted plan to take him down. But why? Why would anyone want to destroy him? "Sarah, I need to know everything. You have to tell me what you overheard." Sarah looked around the kitchen one last time before she spoke again, her voice trembling. "There was talk of your finances being stretched thin. They planned to buy you out at a fraction of your company's worth, then sell it off in pieces. They'd make a fortune, and you'd be left with nothing." Charles stood still, the weight of her words settling over him. He had been so focused on growing his empire, so determined to push forward, that he had failed to see the warning signs. He had been played, and now he had to act fast. "Thank you, Sarah. You've saved my life," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of relief and determination. Sarah, looking both relieved and exhausted, nodded slowly. "I just didn't want to see you lose everything." As Charles turned to leave the kitchen, he knew what he had to do. The game had changed. He wasn't just fighting for his company anymore. He was fighting for his future, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away from him. Charles's mind was racing as he left the kitchen. The weight of Sarah's words echoed in his ears, but he knew he couldn't afford to waste any time. The clock was ticking, and the trap was already set. He had to act fast if he wanted to save his company and his future. As he made his way back to the meeting room, his steps were firm, each one echoing off the marble floors beneath him. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a den of vipers, a place where everyone was out for themselves. When he reached the door, he paused, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He had to regain control of the situation, to turn the tables on those who thought they could outsmart him. Pushing open the door, he stepped back into the room where his associates were still engaged in their discussions. The tension in the air was palpable, but Charles had one advantage. He knew something they didn't. As he took his seat at the head of the table, the eyes of the room turned to him. They had expected him to be preoccupied with the details of the deal, but he had something else on his mind. He raised his hand, signaling for silence. "Gentlemen," Charles began, his voice steady but with an edge that commanded attention. "I've just been given some new information. It seems there's more to this deal than meets the eye." The room fell silent as Charles looked around, his gaze locking with each person at the table. "There's a lot riding on this merger," he continued. "But it's clear that there are some people here who have a very different agenda." The room shifted uneasily. Charles could see the discomfort on their faces. He didn't have to name names. They knew who he was talking about. "I've just been informed that there are individuals among us who have been planning to exploit this deal for their own gain," Charles said, his eyes narrowing. "And I'm not going to let that happen." For a moment, no one spoke. The tension in the room was thick, but Charles could feel the power shifting in his favor. The investors, the ones who had thought they could manipulate him, were now on the defensive. They hadn't expected him to be so well-informed, so ready to fight back. Charles's voice grew even more firm as he continued. "I know who you are, and I know what you've been planning. But here's the thing, you won't succeed. Not while I'm still in charge." His words hung in the air, a challenge to those who had underestimated him. Charles looked around the table again, his eyes cold and calculating. He could see the fear now. It wasn't just in the way they shifted in their seats. It was in the way they avoided his gaze. They knew that they had been caught. One by one, the investors began to speak up, their voices shaking with unease. They tried to deny the accusations, to push the blame onto others. But Charles wasn't buying it. He had all the pieces of the puzzle now, and he wasn't about to let them slip away. The room was silent again as Charles made his next move. "I'm calling off this deal," he said, his voice resolute. "You all have been playing a dangerous game, and I'm not going to let you win. We'll start over, and this time, I'll be the one setting the terms." The investors exchanged nervous glances. Some of them seemed ready to protest, but no one spoke. They knew better. Charles had taken control of the situation, and they had no choice but to fall in line. As the meeting came to a close, Charles stood up, his mind already moving to the next steps. He had won this round, but he knew the battle wasn't over yet. There were still people out there who would try to take him down. But now he was ready. He had been given a second chance, and he wasn't going to waste it. He walked out of the room, a sense of triumph washing over him. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but think about Sarah, the young girl who had saved him from a fate worse than failure. She had warned him, and he had listened. And in doing so, he had regained control of his empire. As Charles walked out of the meeting room, the weight of his decisions settled on his shoulders. He had made the right call. Calling off the deal had been the only option. But as he walked down the grand hallway of his mansion, he couldn't help but feel that the victory was bittersweet. He had won this round, but he knew the battle wasn't over. The people who had tried to manipulate him, the ones who had thought they could take everything from him, would not give up so easily. He had made enemies that day, powerful ones who wouldn't just sit back and let him walk away unscathed. His mind raced as he thought about his next steps. He needed to regroup, to take stock of everything. And he needed to find out who else had been involved in this plot. But before all of that, there was one thing he knew he had to do. He walked to the back of the mansion, to the small garden where Sarah had warned him. There, standing at the edge of the garden, was the girl who had saved his life. She was alone, her back to him as she looked out over the beautifully landscaped grounds. Charles approached her slowly, unsure of what to say. He had been so focused on the business side of things that he hadn't taken the time to thank her for what she had done. "Sarah," he said, his voice softer than usual. She turned, startled to see him. For a moment, there was silence between them, as if neither knew quite how to bridge the gap that had formed. But then Charles spoke again. "I wanted to thank you. You saved my life today. You saved everything." Sarah looked down, her hands clasped tightly together in front of her. "I didn't do anything," she said quietly. I overheard something. I had to tell you." Charles stepped closer, his gaze steady. "No, you did more than that. You risked everything to warn me. And because of you, my company is safe." Sarah hesitated, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. "I just didn't want to see anyone get hurt," she said, her voice small. "Especially not you." Charles felt a surge of emotion. He had always prided himself on being in control, on having everything in his life mapped out. But in that moment, he realized how much he had taken for granted. Sarah, this quiet, humble girl, had done something he couldn't have done on his own. She had seen what he couldn't, and in doing so, she had changed the course of his future. He couldn't ignore that. "I owe you more than I can say," Charles said, his voice filled with sincerity. "If there's anything I can do to help you, anything at all, you just need to ask." Sarah's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly shook her head. "I don't need anything," she said, her voice steady now. "I just want to make sure things are okay. That's all." Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You've already done more than enough," he said. "But I won't forget this. I promise." As he turned to leave, he felt a renewed sense of determination. He had come so close to losing everything. But now, thanks to Sarah, he had a second chance. A chance to not only protect his company, but to make sure no one would ever underestimate him again. The game had changed, and this time, he would be the one in control. The next few days were a blur for Charles. The events of the past week had shaken him to his core, but they also had ignited a fire within him. Sarah had saved his empire, and in doing so, she had reminded him of what he had been neglecting for far too long: the importance of loyalty, trust, and the people who truly mattered. As he sat in his office, reviewing the details of his company's restructuring plan, he couldn't shake the thought of what he owed to Sarah. He had already made up his mind. He would make sure she was taken care of. Charles knew he couldn't just offer her a reward. It had to be something meaningful, something that would show her how much he appreciated her bravery. But as he was deep in thought, his phone rang. It was his lawyer, Paul, calling with urgent news. "Charles, we've got a problem. The people involved in that scheme, they're not giving up. They're already trying to undermine the new deal. We need to move fast." Charles leaned back in his chair, feeling the weight of the situation once again. "What's their next move?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "They've already started planting rumors about the financial stability of the company. It's only a matter of time before the media catches on. You need to act quickly." Charles knew what he had to do. He couldn't afford to let these people destroy everything he had worked for. But this time, he would be ready. As the days passed, he put his plan into motion. He called in his top executives, trusted advisors, and legal team. They worked tirelessly to refute the rumors and expose the schemers who had tried to take him down. But Charles wasn't just relying on his own resources. He had learned a valuable lesson from Sarah. Sometimes, it wasn't about being the most powerful person in the room. It was about trusting those around you. Sarah had shown him that. She had trusted him with her knowledge, and he had to do the same. He turned to the people closest to him, the ones who had supported him through thick and thin, and asked for their help. Together, they fought back. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but the truth began to surface. The fake deals, the lies, and the manipulations were exposed. The people behind the scheme were taken down one by one. Charles stood firm, unyielding in his resolve to protect his company and the people he cared about. But there was something more. As he watched the tables turn, he realized how far he had come. The battle for his company wasn't just about money and power. It was about integrity, loyalty, and the courage to stand up when everyone else thought you were finished. In the end, Charles emerged victorious. The deal that had once seemed like his downfall was now a stepping stone to something greater. And in the midst of his triumph, he made a decision that would change everything. He called Sarah into his office. "I owe you more than I can say," he told her, his voice filled with gratitude. "You saved my life, Sarah. But it's not just about the company. You've shown me what really matters. And because of that, I want to offer you a place in this company. Not as a housekeeper, but as someone who has earned the right to be here, to be part of something bigger than all of us." Sarah stood frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief. She had never imagined that a simple act of kindness could lead to something so life-changing. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. Charles smiled warmly. "You don't have to say anything. Just know that you're part of this now. You're part of our future." As Sarah left his office that day, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. She had never expected anything like this. But in the end, she had proven that even the smallest voice could make the biggest difference. And Charles? He knew he would never again take for granted the power of loyalty and trust. He had learned that lesson the hard way, but it was a lesson that would guide him for the rest of his life. The days that followed were a blur of meetings, strategy sessions, and late nights spent poring over documents. Charles had regained control of his company, but now the real work began. With the schemers exposed and his company's future secured, it was time to rebuild. But as he sat in his office, his thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah. She had proven herself not only to him, but to herself as well. The quiet girl who had worked in the shadows, invisible to those who should have seen her, had shown a courage that few could ever match. And now, she was a part of something bigger. Charles knew he had to follow through on his promise to her. He'd offered her a place in the company, but that was only the beginning. As the weeks passed, Sarah settled into her new role. She wasn't just part of the team now, she was a key player. Charles had made sure of that. He entrusted her with more responsibility, giving her a chance to prove her worth in ways no one had ever imagined. Sarah, who had always been quiet and reserved, was now the person people turned to for guidance. It was a transformation that no one saw coming, not even Sarah herself. Charles watched with pride as she flourished. Her attention to detail, her ability to spot the smallest flaws, and her deep understanding of the company's inner workings were invaluable. It wasn't long before her reputation spread throughout the company. People who had once ignored her now sought her advice, recognizing her as the intelligent and capable leader she had always been. But as Sarah's confidence grew, so did the challenges she faced. The higher she climbed, the more enemies she made. Some of the old guard, those who had been part of the company for years, weren't happy with the changes Charles was making. They didn't like seeing someone like Sarah, someone who had once been invisible, suddenly in a position of power. They began to whisper behind her back, questioning her abilities, trying to undermine her at every turn. Sarah knew what was happening. She could feel the tension, the subtle resistance, but she refused to back down. She had worked too hard to get to this point, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it away from her. One afternoon, as Sarah was leaving her office, she bumped into Charles in the hallway. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of the battles she was fighting. "How's everything going?" he asked, his voice gentle but concerned. Sarah smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's going well, but I know some people aren't happy with the changes." Charles nodded. "I'm aware of that. But I believe in you, Sarah. You've earned your place here. Don't let anyone make you doubt that." Sarah looked up at him, a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty in her gaze. "I don't want to disappoint you," she said softly. Charles placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't. You've already proven yourself. Just keep doing what you're doing. And remember, you have the strength to overcome anything." Sarah's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. It wasn't just the opportunity he had given her. It was the belief he had shown in her, the trust that had been placed in her hands. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she truly belonged. That night, as Sarah sat alone in her office, reviewing documents and making plans for the future, she realized something. The battle for her place in this company had been hard, but it had also been worth it. She had fought for her spot, for her right to be seen, and now, she was here to stay. No one could take that away from her. And with Charles by her side, she knew that anything was possible. As Sarah continued to rise within the company, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Though she had earned the respect of her peers, there was still a constant undercurrent of tension in the office. The whispers behind her back hadn't stopped, and she could sense the growing discomfort among some of the older staff members. Charles had done his best to shield her from the politics of the company, but Sarah knew that power struggles were inevitable in a place this big. As weeks passed, she realized that she wasn't just facing external pressure. She was starting to feel the weight of her own decisions. There were times when she wondered if she had made the right choice by stepping up so quickly, by challenging the status quo. But whenever doubt crept in, she reminded herself of the one thing that had gotten her here. She had never backed down. One morning, as Sarah was going through some final reports for the upcoming board meeting, she was interrupted by a knock on her office door. She looked up to see Charles standing there, a slight smile on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked, his voice warm and reassuring. "Of course," Sarah replied, motioning for him to come in. As Charles sat down across from her, she could see the concern in his eyes. "You've been working nonstop, Sarah. I know you're dedicated, but you've got to take a step back every now and then. It's easy to get consumed by the pressure, but don't lose sight of what's important." Sarah looked at him, appreciating his concern, but feeling a sense of guilt settle in. "I know. I've been so focused on proving myself. I don't want to let you down. I don't want to lose everything we've worked for." Charles nodded understandingly. "I get it. But you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders. We're a team, Sarah. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is trust the people around you." His words resonated with Sarah. She had been so used to fighting alone, so used to being invisible, that trusting others felt like a foreign concept. But she had learned, through all the challenges and struggles, that she wasn't alone anymore. As the board meeting approached, Sarah stood before the room, filled with company leaders and high-profile investors. The air was thick with anticipation, but this time, she didn't feel nervous. She felt ready. As she spoke about the company's future plans, about the innovations and new directions they were taking, she could feel the shift in the room. The same people who had once doubted her were now listening intently, nodding along. She was no longer just the housekeeper's daughter. She was a leader, someone whose ideas mattered. When the meeting concluded, Charles stood beside her, a proud smile on his face. "You did great, Sarah. I knew you had it in you." Sarah smiled back, feeling a sense of accomplishment she hadn't thought possible just months ago. But as she walked out of the room, she knew the battle was far from over. There would always be challenges, always be those who tried to tear her down. But now, she had the strength to face them head-on. And more importantly, she had the support of Charles and the rest of the team. As she stepped into the hallway, she looked out the large windows that framed the view of the city below. For the first time in a long while, Sarah allowed herself to believe that she truly belonged here, that she had earned her place. And as the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the skyline, Sarah knew that whatever came next, she was ready to face it. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah settled into her new role with a sense of purpose that she had never known before. She had earned the respect of her colleagues, but the journey was far from easy. The whispers behind her back never fully stopped, and as her influence grew, so did the resistance. People who had once been her peers now saw her as a threat. It wasn't just about her position, it was about the way she had shaken up the system. Yet, Sarah refused to be intimidated. She had already proven herself once, and she would prove herself again. But there was something different about this time. She had found her voice, and she wasn't going to let anyone take that away. One evening, Charles called her into his office. She had just finished a long day, but she sensed this meeting was important. As she walked in, she saw him sitting behind his desk, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Sarah, come in," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of seriousness. "There's something we need to discuss." Sarah took a seat across from him, sensing that the conversation was going to be about more than just business. Charles leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I've been hearing things. Some of the old guard are still trying to undermine you, trying to make you question your place here. But I know you. You don't back down." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar sting of frustration, but also a renewed sense of determination. "I won't back down," she said quietly. "But it's getting harder to stay focused. The constant pushback, it takes its toll." Charles's eyes softened, and he smiled. "I know. But you've come so far, Sarah. You've fought for everything you have, and that's something they'll never understand. The truth is, you're the future of this company. Not just because of what you know, but because of who you are." The words felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. She had always feared that she wasn't enough, that her past would haunt her forever. But Charles saw something in her that no one else had, and for the first time, she believed it. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't think I've ever really believed it, but now I do." Charles stood and walked around the desk to where she sat. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch reassuring. "I don't just believe in you, Sarah. I know you're capable of leading this company into the future. You've already proven that. Now it's time for you to take the reins." The words hit her like a wave, crashing over her with a force that she wasn't expecting. Take the reins? She had always been the one to follow, the one to support. But now, it was her time to lead. And with that realization, a new kind of confidence began to grow inside her. She was no longer just the housekeeper's daughter. She was a leader. She had a vision for the company, a direction that would take them beyond what anyone had imagined. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed the support of those around her, the people who believed in her. The very people who had once underestimated her were now looking to her for guidance. And with Charles by her side, she knew she could face whatever challenges came her way. As Sarah walked out of Charles's office that night, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never felt before. She was ready to lead, ready to face the future, and ready to prove once and for all that she belonged in this world. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had already come too far to turn back now. Months passed, and the transformation within the company was undeniable. Sarah had not only proven herself to be a capable leader, but her vision for the future was beginning to take shape. The company was thriving, and so was Sarah. Her once hidden potential was now a driving force in the business, and the employees who had once whispered behind her back now looked to her with respect. Charles, who had taken a chance on her when no one else would, watched with pride as Sarah grew into the leader he always knew she could be. But with success came new challenges. As the company expanded, Sarah found herself facing a new wave of pressure, balancing the demands of leadership while maintaining her integrity. She had come a long way, but she knew the road ahead would never be easy. There were moments when the weight of it all felt overwhelming, and she often found herself questioning her decisions. But each time she felt that doubt creep in, she reminded herself of the journey that had brought her here, the long hours, the sacrifices, and the people who had helped her along the way. It was that reminder that kept her going, that pushed her to stay true to her values. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her office reviewing the latest financial reports, there was a knock on her door. She looked up to see Charles standing there, a warm smile on his face. "You've been doing great," Sarah, he said, his voice filled with pride. But I think it's time we talk about the future. Sarah set down the papers in front of her and leaned back in her chair, meeting his gaze. What do you mean? She asked. Charles walked in and sat down across from her. The company is in good hands, but it's time for you to take the next step. I think it's time we discuss succession. You've earned it. Sarah felt her heart race. Succession? She had always thought of herself as the one who was just filling in, doing the work, making sure things ran smoothly. She had never imagined herself taking over, at least not so soon. But as she looked at Charles, she realized something. She had already taken that step. She had been leading all along. I don't know what to say, Sarah said, her voice barely a whisper. Charles smiled, his eyes filled with understanding. You don't have to say anything, Sarah. I've seen what you've done for this company, and I know you're ready. The future is yours. The words hit her like a wave. It was official. She wasn't just the housekeeper's daughter anymore. She was the future of this company, and she was ready. The path ahead would be challenging, but Sarah knew one thing for certain. She was no longer afraid. She had fought for her place, and now, she would lead with the same courage, integrity, and determination that had gotten her to this point. As Sarah stood on the balcony of the company's headquarters that evening, looking out over the city, she realized that this was just the beginning. The road had been long, but she had earned every step of it. The future was hers, and with it, the chance to build something that would last, not just for herself, but for everyone who had helped her along the way. And as the sun set over the horizon, casting a golden light across the city below, Sarah knew that she had truly arrived. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in her life, she knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. Millionaire stories often showcase dramatic rises to success, filled with challenges, resilience, and the determination to overcome obstacles. In this captivating tale, a young woman, once invisible in the eyes of those around her, finds herself thrust into a world of power and influence. As the story unfolds, we witness her transformation from a humble housekeeper's daughter to a respected leader in a multi-million-dollar company. Through adversity, betrayal, and unexpected alliances, this millionaire story highlights the importance of integrity, loyalty, and the courage to stand up for what's right. The story takes the viewer on an emotional journey, offering an inspiring look at how a single act of kindness can alter the course of an entire life. As the protagonist fights to protect the company she's come to lead, the lessons of perseverance, trust, and self-belief shine through. This is not just a tale of business success, but a true millionaire story about overcoming the odds, proving your worth, and leaving a legacy. With challenges at every corner, the path to success isn't easy, but it's one that rewards those who never give up. A twist of fate leads to a powerful climax that will have you rooting for the underdog as she finally takes control of her destiny. This millionaire story teaches us that no matter where you start, with hard work, determination, and the courage to trust yourself, you too can rise to unimaginable heights.